Hey out there. I want to do a quick video showing some of the best SolidWorks tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years. Nothing super advanced that you'll never use and nothing super basic like how to do a sketch, but kind of that middle zone that'll just help you be more efficient and be a better solid modeler. I've broken things up into a couple of categories and there's the timestamps for them, but I really recommend just watching the whole thing. I'll bet I'll get at least something you don't know. I noticed that Jeremy Fielding just came out with a SolidWorks video. It's super good, covers a lot of stuff in a lot of great detail. So I'll put a link to it in the description. Definitely check it out after this. Okay, so let's get started. An easy way to switch between parts or files that you have open, if you just hold down Control and then hit Tab, just tap it, this window comes up and it shows everything you have open. And if you just keep holding down Control and tapping Tab, you can see it highlights the parts in order. And if I just let go of Control, then it goes to that part. When you have this open, you just open it by Control Tab. I can also just click on one that I have open. So if I have a huge list, or if I go past the one I want, I could just click on it and it'll open that one. Way faster than trying to go to Window and pick the one you want just by its name. And this is super handy because it gives you a little preview of what you're looking for. One tool that I use a ton, and I think most people do, is the Measure tool. So it's up in Evaluate and Measure. But instead of having to go there every time, I've made a hotkey that brings up Measure, and I just made it Q. You can make it whatever you want, but I figure Q doesn't get used all that often. So whatever I'm doing, I can just hit Q, and it's right there. I just always keep my hand kind of resting, ready to use the Control Tab or a Q or anything on the left side of the keyboard there. So it's super handy. So then you can just start clicking and measuring stuff and escape and get out. Okay, to set up your hotkey, or any hotkey, you go to Tools, Customize, and then Keyboard, and now you can search for whatever command you want. Showing you Measure, so it brings up the one you want. You just add whatever shortcut you want there. It can be any keystroke. I made it Q, and just hit OK. One thing that drives me crazy when I see engineers give presentations and things, they will have the default or some other background on SolidWorks, and then when they do screenshots, it comes up with the shaded background. I always, not necessarily when I'm modeling, but definitely whenever I'm going to do a screenshot or any kind of presentation, I'll make the background white, and then it shows up like this, and it's just way better than this when you show it cropped in a PowerPoint or whatever. So just always do that. And then I never use the real graphics or shadows or any of that kind of stuff. It's just going to slow down your computer. It doesn't really add anything. Definitely don't use perspective. That really messes things up. It messes up when you try to select edges and things. It'll select the wrong thing. So never use that unless you're trying to export a pretty picture or something. Last kind of general tip here is section views. I think everybody knows you can pick a plane or an edge, and then you can do your section views. You can drag that plane around where you want it to be. Something that took me embarrassingly long to notice is that you can actually pick a second plane to do an additional section view of. So on that same view, while you're doing that section view, you can also pick a second plane or a third, and then it'll cut both of those. So you can then see, it doesn't make a ton of sense in this example, but there's definitely situations where it helps to have two section views to show what's going on inside a housing or something. And then the next time you might want to show that same thing, when you click on it, it'll default back to the same planes, which can be handy. Moving on to part-specific tips. This one I've actually been using a lot recently as I've been making some plastic housings and things for a client. So let me open a new part. And I'll use this especially when I'm trying to go really fast and just make a test fixture or something. I know it's going to be multiple parts, but I don't necessarily want to manage a bunch of part files and names and updating of things. So a lot of these parts have just been cut out of 1/4-inch PVC plastic. So what I'll do is say this is the base of whatever housing I'm designing, and I will just, in the same part, so not in separate parts and assemblies and everything, I'll extrude, say 3 inches, but uncheck merge. Then they stay separate, and they are separate part bodies in this part. Then I can keep going, I can have cuts that go through all of them, whatever the design needs. And then I've got an assembly that is super quick to update and manage. This obviously isn't something you'd want to do for a big complicated product. Okay, next thing I want to show you in a part file is that if you want to add a picture to the background so that you can trace it or use it as a reference when you're designing your part, this is how you do that. So say we want to add a picture here, so we create a sketch. Then we go to Tools, Sketch Tools, Sketch Picture. I'm going to pick this. Then it drops it in, and it's probably going to be some crazy size. But you can then scale it around. So say I want it to be exactly as wide as this part, then I can still grab edges, scale things as I need to. It's obviously kind of a weird example, but you could envision, having a picture of a mating part for this housing. You can go in here and type in dimensions and rotations and check scaling and transparencies and things. And then you just hit OK, and then that is on that plane. It's just in a sketch. So you could name this sketch, reference picture. And then when you do your next sketch, you can then pick points on here. You're not actually picking points, but you can use it as a reference if you needed to have something match up. Okay, this one's pretty cool. I didn't learn this till, again, embarrassingly late, but it is how to cut only certain areas of sketches. So if I have a sketch, and this will be a little random, but say this is some kind of aesthetic, really cool diagram on here. If you just say, okay, I'm done here and I want to do a cut, then it defaults to making these thin features. So you're just cutting on those edges. You can pick the mid plane and pick the width and everything. But if I select a sketch and say I want to do a cut, instead of that, I pick selected contours. Then I can pick whatever zone of that sketch that I want, uncheck thin feature, and now it's only going to extrude or cut in that area. So if I just make a little cut there, so it just helps you use, you can use construction sketches and not have to worry about things not being trimmed correctly. You can have some big intricate pattern and only cut out certain portions of it. This next one I think I'm actually in the minority on. Most people will preach that you should name your features to make them kind of intuitive. Like this one would be, main shell, and this one would be sidewalls, and this one would be screw holes. I don't find that really very useful. If I need to find the sketch for this bore, I just click on it and it highlights over here. If I want to know how these holes were generated, I click on it and it was defined here. I don't think that's very complicated. I don't have to understand or know what somebody else might have named something. You'll find different people have very different naming conventions for what different features and what things are called in their assemblies. So I've just taken to just clicking and then going to the feature. You can also click on a feature if you think it's the right one and it highlights the feature over here. So I think you can go either way. If I want to try to find this chamfer, click on that, it highlights the chamfer. I don't find that difficult at all. I think it's actually quite a bit faster. So it's up to you. I mean, whatever company you work for is probably going to have a convention or a requirement that you name things, or they don't care. It's up to you. That's just my 2 cents. Okay, moving on to assemblies. One thing that I've found super useful in assemblies is the width mate. So if we go into mates, in advanced tab, there's one called width. So you need width selections and tab selections. So I've got this gearbox here with gears in the middle, housing and bearings, and there's a little bit of a gap on either side of the gear, which makes sense. You wouldn't want interference there. So if I want to have that gear exactly in the middle of that gap, for my width selection, if I pick the housing face, the other housing face, and then the gear side, and then the other gear side, now they're locked with the exact same gap on either side. So it's super useful in more situations than just this. Just kind of keep it in the back of your head that you can always mate things to be in the center. You obviously can't count on this staying in the center. You would need shims or something else to hold it in place, but it's a useful one. You should definitely spend some time perusing the advanced mate section here. There's some good stuff, so definitely poke around. Okay, another one I use all the time, and I've seen some people's jaws drop when they see it. I know mine did the first time I saw it. So if you have an assembly and you have a bunch of screws, there's only 4 here, but sometimes there's a ton of washers. What you can do is, if you can get to the bottom edge of the fastener like this, like really easy for a washer, sometimes it's a little trickier for fasteners. So before I click on it, I'm just hovering over that edge. I hold down Control, and then I click and drag from that edge to, I can really, like you can see, I can go to any diameter or any hole feature, and then I let go of the mouse and let go of the keyboard, and now that screw is multiplied and it is actually mated in that hole, not rotationally because the original one wasn't, but it's mated to the face and to the hole. And then, so you can just, if you can position your model so that you can see a bunch of holes, you can just really quickly grab, install, super quick. Love that one. In kind of the same way, you can actually just grab parts from your assembly. So if I hold down Control, left click and drag, so now I have another one of those parts. You can also grab from the feature tree over here. You can hold down Control, drag from there. Sometimes it'll get a little glitchy if you try to grab from the window, and it just only works if you do it from the feature tree, but either way usually works. Something that comes up quite a bit is needing to swap out parts in an assembly. So if I needed to swap out a different gear for this gear, I'd right click it, go down to the bottom here and replace components. Then I can browse to find a part, or this is the other parts that I have open. So if I want to put that one in there, it tries to match up mates between the old part and the new part. This gear was created using the same features as the bigger one, so it swapped in nicely. A lot of times if somebody else created it, or the planes or the faces aren't in the same place or named the same thing, it'll come in and mates will break, but you just have to fix them. If you download fasteners from McMaster, a lot of times they'll be set up the same way, so you can swap in different length fasteners and gears and things like that, but it's a case-by-case thing. If you're having trouble opening an assembly and certain parts aren't showing up, what you can do is File Open, single click on the assembly, and then click References, and then it'll list all of the parts that go into that assembly and the path to where they are. So sometimes you'll notice one will be going off into some other location, or it's just broken, and I think it'll just show a bunch of question marks. And then if you want to redirect that to something in the right folder, you just double click on the part, and then you can click to the one that you want it to reference, click Open, and that'll swap that one in. Then you just hit OK, and it'll use the references that you just changed. Sometimes in a part or an assembly, if you want to do a sketch or a mate, and you want to align something with the center of this bore, but for some reason you can't pick whatever surfaces you would normally pick, you can also use turn on temporary axes. So this is regular axes, so you'd have to go in and actually create an axis where you wanted it. If you click View Temporary Axes, then it puts a temporary axis on anything that's cylindrical. So now you could use this in a sketch, or if this was an assembly, you could use it for a mate. It can be useful. You don't have to have a bunch of axes in your feature tree, but you can still basically use it as an axis. Okay, moving on to drawings. So this is the drawing of the assembly that we've been working with. One thing that's pretty useful is to be able to have your title and your drawing number and your revision and certain other fields in your drawing automatically fill in. So this is how I have my templates set up. If you do, you right click on the sheet and go to Edit Sheet Format. You'll see these just show up as dashes. If I just double click on it, it just shows the dashes and you can write over it, and that's it. But if you right click and say Edit Text in Window, then it shows this bit of code here. It's I think it's Part, Properties, Sheet, and then Description. So in my parts and assemblies, I have set up custom properties under the Custom tab. So I've got part number, drawn by, revision, description, etc. And I've got these 3 dashes just as a placeholder. So if I put description as gearbox, then I go back to the drawing, now it shows gearbox there. And when I go back to edit sheet, then it shows that. So I can do that same thing where I can put in drawing number and revision, material and finish in the part file, and then it automatically flows in here. You can obviously add your regular views, but a lot of times you want to show some very specific angle of a part. And so say we really wanted to show things exactly oriented like this. So then I would go and click on your view selector up here and click this little telescope with a star. It's add a new view. So you click on that. And I just name this like ISO 2 and say OK. And so however I had this oriented is now ISO 2. So if I go into the drawing and I add a model view, now ISO 2 shows up as one of my standard views. And then I can add that, and if I wanted to do a section view or show it shaded or however I wanted to show it, that's how you can do that. If you have a part that has multiple bodies, like the one I showed earlier, I believe that was this one, you can also pick which part bodies you want to show in this view. This comes in handy if you have a weldment that you do all in one part, but you want to have a drawing view showing just how you cut one tube or one section of that part to size. So what you do is you place your view, and then up here in the top window you can click select bodies. And so say I just want to show those 2 bodies, I click OK. Now it just shows those 2, or I can do 1. So you can have a fairly complex, housing that you threw together in one part with multiple bodies, and then just have details of each of those parts without having to save them out as individual parts. You can just show those particular bodies. You can also do a similar thing on assemblies. If you just right click on a view and go to properties, you can then say hide show components or hide show bodies. So hide show components, I can just go on here and click, I want to hide that one. I say apply, and it hides that part. And then I can pick as many parts as I want and kind of dig through and show only the parts that I want. Not super applicable here, but you can definitely use that to your advantage in some places. Instead of having to have a special configuration of an assembly that hides certain parts, you can just hide it in the drawing view. Just makes it a little easier. And then if you want to show those again, you go back into properties, hide show components, and you can just delete it out of there, and it'll show back up again. Sometimes when you have a section view, it gets really cluttered because you see the cross-section of the materials, but then sometimes in the background you see other edges showing up and it gets really confusing. So what you can do is select that view and then click slice section, and you can see it only shows the surfaces or solids where the section is actually being cut. So I'll undo that and do that a couple of times. So now you can see the background and now you can't. It's just a little more clear. Sometimes it makes more sense to show the background. Sometimes it makes more sense not to. It just depends on what exactly you're trying to show, but this can help make things a lot more clear. If a circle in a drawing is unbroken, like this bearing diameter, and you dimension it, it'll give you a diameter. But if I try to dimension this edge here, it's broken and not a complete circle, so it'll give you a radius. A lot of times that's not really the most useful dimension, and you want that to be a diameter as well. So you just select that, go to liters, and then you can pick show as diameter, or you can change the liters to different formats and things. But that will at least get it to show as a diameter, which is a lot more useful. When you get into more complex assemblies, definitely don't shy away from section views and views where certain parts are hidden. Especially in gear trains like this, a section view is a perfect way of showing exactly what meshes with what. You can do a big exploded view, which is really good in a lot of situations, but a section view can really show a lot as far as what interferes with what and what is locating what. So you can see the bearings, you can see the gear, you can see a set screw, as opposed to if you just had this thing all exploded, it might not be so obvious where exactly things went. So section views are super useful. Sometimes if you have a really contoured part, all of your tangent lines will start making drawing views really cluttered. So if you just click on the view, right click and say tangent edge. Right now it's selected tangent edge visible. You can do it with font or removed. So if you do it with font, it'll make it a grayed dashed line, which helps a lot. That can be a lot more clear. Or if it's just a really crazy view and curves all over the place, you can just say removed, and then that's what you get. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope you learned something. Leave any comments below if you have any other tips you want to share. Any questions, I'll try to get back to you. Again, make sure to check out Jeremy Fielding's SolidWorks tips and tricks video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.